There we are. So, like I was saying, is I was having this, for me, this all kind of came to me when I was in nursing school. And, having been to Bible college, we had this, there was always this question in the Bible is, what's the difference between living under grace and living under the law? And how do we know what is right apart from, laws that tell us what's right and wrong? And so, as I was going through nursing school, having already been to Bible college, one of our courses was in ethics. And in that class, I was introduced for the first time, really, to like virtue ethics and old, Aristotelian ethics and stuff like that. And that's what kind of like inspired me to rethink the way I understood the New Testament and some of my beliefs in Christianity. And it was a consequence of being exposed to the way people thought about ethics and morality at the time of the church, in the first century. And so here we're going to kind of zoom in on, ethics a little bit. And and here we go. Um, so the first part is we have like three concepts: ethics, morality, and laws. And lots of times they're really confused. We get a lot of confusion between them. And I'm thinking back like when I was in Bible college, how it was common for us to think is like, how would we even know what was right or what was wrong unless we were told to? And so we didn't, at least in my school, really entertain the notion so much of like natural law or that people have an innate moral impulse, at least not in that sense. We saw the laws and morality and ethics, all of these things as kind of being almost the same thing, and we didn't really tease them out apart from each other. And so that's the first thing is we'll do here is we're just kind of like tease out what's the difference between them all. And so the first off is laws. What are laws? And laws are formal rules, and this is kind of important, and they're contextual. They govern behavior in a society, and they're upheld and enforced by the state, and they enforce standards of conduct. And the key thing is that they can be just or unjust. Sometimes we have good laws and sometimes we have bad laws, and we all kind of understand this. Um, And another key thing is that, at the bottom point there is that they're subject to evaluation, which means like we recognize, when a law is good or bad because we have another standard that's separate from the law. If the law is what created ethics, then we wouldn't be able to tell what was right or wrong because, the law is telling us. Um, but laws can be just, they can be unjust, and we evaluate them through some sort of other standard. And so there's a distinction between law and ethics and law and morality. Why this matters is the Bible really clearly, at least in New Testament theology, and I think most cultures really, when you dig into it, distinguish between the law and ethics. And so I have a couple of verses here. John 1:17. The law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And so there's a distinction between the law and Jesus' example. There's another verse where Jesus talks about the law, and he says, they're asking him if it's okay to get divorced. And he says, Moses permitted you to divorce because you had hard hearts. But from the beginning, this isn't the way it was to be. And so there's this idea that the laws are contextual, and Jesus seems to be applying this, also. And then finally in John 5, you have this. This is when Jesus performs a healing, and they say, "Hey, there are 6 days to work. Why are you healing on the Sabbath?" And Jesus' response is, "My Father is always at work. Is it okay to heal on the Sabbath? Is it okay to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath? You tell me." And so Jesus is questioning the interpretation of the law. He's also questioning the intent of the law. What does it really mean? Next up, we have like, what is morality? Um, this is really interesting. Morality, I kind of think of it as like, little children, we're raised with an idea, a perception of the world, a kind of a moral framework, and it's just kind of like given to us. It's the culture that we're raised in. In my case, growing up in Hawaii, it's the family that you're raised in. Um, which in some of us, it might be more functional than others. It might be a big family or a small family. You might have lots of siblings, or you might have had really hard times. So you have certain frameworks and beliefs that are structured around there. And then also we went to a Catholic church, and so I have like the customs of being in Hawaii, the religious values that I have, my beliefs, my principles, all of those things are just kind of inherited. And so that's the idea of like when we talk about morality and our sense of right or wrong, we kind of like how we learn language, little children just kind of pick it up from watching other people, mimicking other people saying, and before you know it, at 2 or 3 years old, before they've gone to school, they're speaking English or speaking their native language. Morality is kind of like that. It's an informal framework of values. They're learned socially from our family, culture, religion. We practice them habitually, and we don't really shop around. We just kind of like accept them as they are. And they can evolve when questioned or critically examined, but for the most part, they're just kind of sitting there in the background. And why does this matter? Um, so we see in John chapter 4, this is where Jesus meets the Samaritan woman. He sits there she's sitting there at the well, and he's having a discussion. And in the parentheses, the gospel says, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And so it explains that there was this moral custom that was going on, and Jesus is here challenging that custom of how people associate with the Samaritans. John 9, we see another one when he heals the blind man. Before the healing, they say, "Who sinned? This man or his parents? That he was born blind." And again, there's this notion that sin causes misfortune. That when bad things happen, it's somehow deserved. And Jesus' response is, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened that the glory of God could be shown. And so we have, morality, we have the way that, we're raised with things. And in the Bible, it kind of pokes at it and says that, these things can be challenged. And it's especially in the Gospel of John, it's asserting a new standard. And then finally we have ethics. And this is what my whole thesis was about, the ethics of the Gospel of John. And really the ethics was the idea of a love-centered ethic and a Christocentric ethic. An ethic that begins and ends with Jesus and his example and his character and who he is. Um, and so when we think of the word ethics, it's distinguished from laws, it's distinguished from morality, and that it's systematic and it's reflective. What does that mean? Is that, by systematic, it means there's a bunch of like maybe rules, and different ethical systems have different rules, but they're all designed to help us reflect on what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. And so it's a toolkit. It provides a framework for evaluating moral norms and laws and our social customs. And we kind of see this, in the example of Jesus when he encounters the paralytic, when he encounters the blind man, when he encounters the woman at the well. Unlike morality, which is inherited, and we just kind of like assume because we've kind of acquired it through growing up, ethics is something that we have to like really think about, and we have to learn. It's like math. At some point you need to be shown how to do algebra, and so the same thing goes on with ethics. Ethics where we're asking ourselves, why should we act this way? What's the nature of the good? How do we know what's right and what's wrong? And in an ideal world, our laws and our morals would be shaped by this kind of ethical reflection. But that's not always so. So why does this matter? Ethics are shaped by values, principles, and purpose. And so when we talk about ethics, that's really kind of, we're going to be making some truth claims about what's important to us. What's the purpose of life, or the purpose of being a human, or what is my purpose in a certain moral action? Those are the kinds of questions that we're going to ask when we think about ethics. And when we talk about the ethics of Jesus, what we find is that it's defined by love. And especially in the Gospel of John, that's the only command we have, is to love one another. Another aspect of Jesus' unique ethics is that it's participatory, in the sense that we share in God's loving will by abiding in Christ. And so the ethics of Jesus are this abiding with him in relationship with the God, orchestrated by love. And in this sense, it's also what the word is theonomic. God's law is there, and we live God's commands as mediated by this participatory love. We're sharing in the love of God. So why does all of this matter? These terms. For the law was, I've already quoted this before, for the law was through Moses, grace and truth, or through Jesus Christ. Jesus is challenging legal and moral conventions. And in my previous talk, when I was talking about the Imago Dei, I brought out that people are generally likely to just kind of read our own values into a situation. Lots of times we act out of self-interest, and then we modify our moral reasoning. Sometimes we do what we want to do and then make up an excuse for why what we did was right. And so why all of this matters is to kind of like get to the heart of it. Is like, is there a standard way that we ought to think about our interactions with other people? Is there something, is there a norm that we ought to follow, um, to kind of hold ourselves in check? Because the normal thing, or the most common thing for people to do, is to just go ahead, make a decision, and then justify it later. And so, the normal way that people act, at least in the lab, when we do these studies, is people tend to be swayed primarily by their self-interest, not always consciously. And so I'm kind of like trying to explore what a Christocentric ethic would be. What does that look like? And so in modern thinking, we have these 5 different schools of ethics, and so I have them kind of listed here. And so that little illustration there is the story of the rich man and Lazarus, where there's this great gulf separating the two of them, and the rich man is in torment, and Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom. Do we obey to obtain rewards and avoid punishments? If that's our rationale in following God, then this is an ethical system called egoism. It's like, what's in it for me? Ultimately, it is motivated by either a fear of punishment or a desire for rewards, or like lots of times people say this is the ethical principle that's just really focused on my own self-interest. Sometimes I would say that egoist ethics mimic a type of spiritual extortion. This is something that Martin Luther opposed when he did his 95 thesis, when he started the Protestant Reformation. Is at the time they were selling forgiveness. You could get time out of purgatory in exchange for money, and confession and indulgences. And so, this is kind of like this spiritual extortion that's going on. Here's another example of it is, since John chapter 1 begins with the idea of calling us little children and giving us the blessing of being called little children, the children in the family of God, we can use this kind of an analogy. If I tell a little kid to go tell my child to clean their room, and I will give them some ice cream if they clean it, that's egoism. I'm going to give you a reward for doing it. Now, whatever this command is, there's no moral claim in it. It doesn't necessarily have to be right or wrong. I could tell the child to go slap his sister on the head and I'll give him ice cream. The motivation is only to get the thing, whatever it is. And so that's what egoism is about, is like I'll act in whichever way in order to avoid punishment or to get the reward. So what does Jesus have to say about egoism? Jesus is certainly not adhering to this at all. John chapter 7, whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. And so he's not in it for self-gain. I'm not seeking glory for myself, he says in John 8. And in John 10, you have the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Um, the the ethics of Jesus, the sacrificial servitude, the going to the cross, none of this exudes egoism at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The next command is, or the next type of thinking, ethical system is something called divine command or authoritarianism. I have them both listed. Authoritarianism is, you'll see this like in places like the old Soviet Republic, or even in North Korea now, where the command of the state is what is law. They actually claim to have moral authority in and of themselves. Divine command ethics. Again, it says that something is good or right because it has been commanded. And so, Plato in his dialogue Euthyphro challenges this. So is an act good because the gods commanded it, or do the gods command it because it's good? And so this is, he's kind of like doing a little play there. Is what is the nature of good? In divine command theory, we're saying that, whether God commands, stealing, killing, or kidnapping, if it's commanded by God, then it becomes good because God commanded it. And that's the idea of divine command theory, is that if we look to the Bible as a list of commands, we don't really evaluate their moral duty or their moral intent or anything that's going on. We don't even weigh if it's right or wrong. We just see it as God commanded it, therefore it's automatically good because it's the command of God. This is challenged by Jesus. The moral weight of God's commands is not rooted in the command itself. God's commands have inherent moral value because they're rooted in God's nature. The commands express God's character, namely his love. Obedience is participation in God's loving will. And the commands bring life and truth in the context of love. Or at least that's what's going on in our example of Jesus. And we're actually kind of like more than halfway through it, so we're coming up towards the last third or so of this. Deontology. It's kind of a rule-centered ethics. This is the idea that commands do have value in and of themselves, that killing is inherently wrong, not only when explicitly prohibited by God, that certain actions have moral worth. In deontology, we judge actions by whether they fulfill moral duties or principles. I'm trying to think of a good example from like a little children's perspective is it's like when two kids fight, one kid slaps the other kid and the other one hits him back, and a mom says to him, why did you hit him? Well, he hit me first. And you say something to the effect of, well, two wrongs don't make a right. The moral reasoning there is that the fighting is wrong all the time. And so that's deontology, is that you're telling little kid that something is wrong and explain to them that it's always wrong no matter what. If we were to go back real quick to this divine command ethics, if a little child does something and you don't want them to do it anymore and they say, why? And you say, because I told you, that's why. You haven't actually explained why it's right or wrong. You've just said, because I'm the mom or I'm the dad, this is the way it is. That's an example of kind of like authoritarian ethics or divine command ethic. It's rooted only in the fact that mom or dad said so. Whereas here in deontology, we're actually appealing to the moral sense of the command itself. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. The fighting is always wrong. Well, when Jesus weighs in, what does he say? The chief command is to love. You know, a critique of divine command ethics and a critique of deontology and this command ethics is that the Bible is filled with so many different commands all over the place. If you go to Leviticus, right after it says to love your neighbor as yourself, it also says don't mix cotton with polyester. Don't have two different kinds of fabrics in the same thing. You know, how do we weigh one command over the other? You know, how do we weigh the food laws and all this other stuff? The chief command is to love, and the command to love is repeated in all four of the Gospels. It's repeated in the epistles. It's throughout the New Testament. It's the only command in the Gospel of John. And in almost every instance that appears, it's referred to as the summary of the law and the prophets. Um, and in the New Testament and Jewish rabbinic tradition, it was already known, especially in rabbinic tradition, it was already known to be a summary of the law and the prophets, even before the New Testament was written. And I like this quote, is commands flow from the abiding life. They are fruit, not root. This is a critique that we're going to find in the Gospel of John, and we'll come across again. And then we have something called utilitarianism. Um, this is the morality of actions, which is judged by their outcomes. You see this in Star Trek all the time. Um, you know, that's when Spock dies. He quotes a leading utilitarian ethicist, and he says the goods of the many outweigh the goods of the few or the one. You know, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. The principle of utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Um, Obedience is oriented to maximize outcomes. And in the Bible or in religious utilitarianism, it's often achieved for religious goals, where it's modified to achieve religious goals. You know, examples might be salvation, well-being, the greatest good, or love. Um, an example of this, again, when we think of like, you know, telling a little child, okay, go ahead and clean your room. And they say, why? And say, well, if you eat in your room and if it gets really messy, then it's gonna attract cockroaches. You're gonna have bugs, and you certainly don't want that in your room, right? And they're like, yes, I don't want that in my room. So now the moral command to clean your room is based on an outcome, and so you've judged it to be worthy of following because you know the outcome, the consequence of not following it are worse. Or you might use a different argument as like, hey, you have friends coming over and you want them to be impressed, don't you? Why, yes, I do. So you go ahead and clean the house. You know, so there's this benefit to be had. Um, the action has moral value based on that outcome. What's the critique in the Gospel of John? Utilitarianism risks relativizing. Um, you might have heard the ends justify the means. That is a critique, a very common critique of utilitarianism. In John 11:48, 48 to 50, we see a good example of this. The Pharisees are wondering, what do we do about this? You know, the resurrection of Lazarus has just taken place. He says everybody is going to him. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. And then Caiaphas, the high priest, says, "You guys know nothing at all. It's good for one man to perish, so that the sins, you know, so that the nation would endure, you know, for one man to die for many." Um, and then there's a little commentary in the Gospel of John. He says he wasn't speaking just on his own behalf, but as the high priest, he was speaking, you know, prophetically. The Gospel of John portrays this as being the religious leaders and Caiaphas as being morally blind. They have this wonderful utilitarian justification for what they're doing. They're going to betray Jesus and send him off to the government. Um, for their own benefit, to save the nation is, presumably what they're thinking. Um, but they're compromising it. They're performing what some people call dirty hands tactics. They're committing an injustice in the pursuit of that greater goal. Um, Common sermon topics. What does this all look like? Um, Lots of times you'll hear, turn or burn type sermons, salvation as a kind of fire insurance. Tithing as a path to prosperity. These are, sermons that are based on utilitarianism. Obedience to Christian leaders as modern day prophets. I've certainly heard this. And so now you've got like kind of this divine command type theology coming in there, is that, these are prophets of God, you have to obey them. Disasters and misfortune as God's judgment. Jerry Falwell, as numerous times um, spoke out on this, is when, certain economic or, certain things took place in the United States, he would preach and say, this is God's judgment against the country. Um, right now, I just attended a conference where they spoke extensively about reclaiming our national culture. And so these are all derived from ethical principles that are or ethical systems that we just covered, like egoism, divine command, deontology, utilitarianism. And so then we get to virtue ethics. This is the thing that inspired me to go back to school in the first place. This is where I stumbled on in nursing school. What is virtue ethics? Virtue ethics focuses on the character of the person, of the moral agent, not just on the rules or the outcome. The goal of virtue ethics is to be a good person by cultivating virtues. The measure of ethics is not what should I do, but what kind of a person should I be? And virtue is united with human nature and necessary for flourishing. This is a key element of virtue ethics, is that it was part of who we are, that we are created to be moral individuals. And so to be a happy individual, to be a flourishing and successful individual, you have to cultivate those moral attributes, those moral virtues. So where does virtue ethics fall short? A classical criticism is that who determines what the virtues are? So there's cultural relativism. The virtues vary from people to people. Virtue ethics in the East are very different set of values as they are in Greco-Roman society. And how do we define them? This was a difficulty even in Aristotle's day. Um, if you read the Socratic dialogues, Plato's dialogues, you'll see that that's the big thing that they never really arrive at. They're constantly trying to define the virtues. And then in John 3, there's this other criticism, is Jesus has this talk with Nicodemus. And it's really significant because Nicodemus follows Jesus throughout the whole gospel. He's an exemplar of somebody who really is kind of virtuous. But being born from above, this is where Jesus says to him, man must be born again. Um, that there's something more going on. It's not just about cultivating virtue, that we're talking about something bigger. And so virtue ethics is kind of falling short. It's not exactly what the New Testament is getting at. When I first started studying it, I thought, this is it. This is what it's all about. It really opened up my eyes in a lot of ways. But really, that was just kind of the beginning. That's probably the springboard from which the New Testament and the Gospel of John is jumping off of. It's latching onto virtue ethics and then taking it deeper. And what I kind of discovered is that there's two ways to think about ethics, externally and internally. And then when we think of it externally, like, egoism, divine command, deontology, utility, what we're saying is that the source of morality is outside of us. Ethics are imposed by rules and outcomes. Um, who I am as an individual is secondary. What matters is what I do or what I accomplish. That's what takes place in external ethics. One good analogy is to think of a politician. Think of a corrupt politician. It shouldn't be too difficult. Somebody who's taking bribes, um, and whatever, he might still be a good politician. He might still be passing a lot of just laws. His motivation isn't good, but he's doing a good job. And so what we would say in that instance is that, his moral character and his moral actions are separated from each other. Even though he has no moral character, he seems to appear to have moral actions, but those actions aren't motivated by his character. It's not because he's a good person. And so that's what we call, and I have that as my last point, what is called an ontological separation. Ontology is this, idea of, it's the study of our being. What is the essence of something? And in here we're asking, what is the essence of ethics? And in many of these ethical systems, they are separated from the character of the person. The other way to think about ethics is internally, where the source of morality is within the person. We're back to that idea of root, not fruit, is that the transformation is the root, is the core of the person, and then the person then yields fruit. So the more source of morality is within the person. The agent's being or the person's being or character is primary. What matters is what we become. And in this instance, ontologically, moral character and moral actions are united. And so now we're coming up towards the end, loving participation in God. What is theosis as compared with virtue ethics? Eternal life. When we look to John 17:3, it says, and this is eternal life, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Is that there's this union with God through Christ is what brings eternal life. Morality flows from abiding participation, not just habituation. So in virtue ethics, it was this grinding away and trying to become better and to learn these virtues. And then the goal was that we would have happiness or self-flourishing by cultivating these virtues. Theosis aims for something different, for divine communion and love. And then the virtues and the life and the eternal life, all of that flows out of this divine communion. Why is this important? Theosis also points back to cosmic religion. In a previous presentation, I talked about how, the ancient religions weren't always moralistic. They were, they had these cycles of time. Every year, they had basically a liturgical calendar very similar to the Catholic or Orthodox tradition. And they had certain rituals that they performed and festivals. And the purpose of all of these things were to evoke the gods and be present with the gods, and they had sacred places and sacred rituals in order to be there. And when we talk about theosis and we look at it, it's really kind of going back to this cosmic thing. Is it's religious, it's moral, and so it's integrating a moral aspect into the cosmic order. The goal of theosis is to enjoy the presence of God. That's what it's all about. And that's why cosmic religions have so much emphasis on sacred places. It's all about being with the gods. Theosis unites the sacred and the mundane. And that's the big difference between theosis and virtue ethics. And so that's the end. Next week, we'll do part 2 where we're going to try to look at the first century ethics, that's rooted in this cosmology, and talk about how the Gospel of John kind of plays off of that. So Johannine ethics makes many theological claims about the nature of the universe. And these claims can be understood against other competing theories. And so next week, that's really what we're going to explore. And thank you very much. And I don't know how to unmute everybody. Give me 1 second.
Well, you did unmute me, so
All right.
working.
All right, so how are you guys doing? Does anybody have any questions? What do you got to say, Mike?
I'm sorry.
Uh, since you called on me, I do have a question.
Yes, go for it.
I'm not sure. One of the things that got discussed early on when we before I even knew you,
Uh-huh.
uh, I think Shrikant knew about your paper and what you were doing, and he recommended we read Gospel of John.
Mm-hmm.
I argued, and because of ethics and morality, and I argued at that point that the Gospel of John was uh, the last gospel. And if you really wanted to pick ethics and morality, you would have picked Matthew. If you really wanted to pick grace, you would have picked Luke to read. And I never got closure on that. Uh, and I take one more factor that came up. Uh, my understanding from archaeologists who were very secular is that the Gospel of John was written as an apologetics because Christians at that time, 90 AD, were being blamed for plagues that the soldiers brought back from their military adventures. And so there was a big famine going on. And so that's one of the persecutions of Christians. And so they softened some of the gospel. And Bishop Irenaeus was one that was involved in casting that Gospel of John. It was written after John and all the apostles had probably died. Uh, so, and why uh, did you and probably others pick the Gospel of John as ethics and morality rather than Matthew?
No, that's a good question. In fact, a lot of people argue, just like what you were saying, is that Matthew's gospel is the one to go to for ethics, morality, because Matthew's gospel has has the Sermon on the Mount and has all these explicit commands. Um, yeah, that would probably be the best way to, but the books refer to it as explicit ethics in Matthew. And what I did is I started off, in this little lecture here, this little talk, with the notion of what law is, and that laws they're derived from an ethical standard. They're not necessarily ethically prescriptive, and laws exist. They can be challenged by ethical systems. So ethical systems are kind of outside of law. They create laws, presumably, ideally, if we have good, strong ethics and morals, will write good, strong, just laws. And if there's a bad law, our ethics allow us to interrogate the laws and figure out what's wrong and to adjust them and challenge them. And so anyhow, all this to say that Matthew, lots of times people look at Matthew as having more ethical content because it has all these explicit laws. The reason why I chose John was for that exact reason, is John has zero. The only command that's in the Gospel of John is to love one another as I have loved you. He says that in John chapter 13. He says it again in John chapter 15. And the idea is that ethics in the first century was communicated, like these virtues were defined through example. And so in the Gospel of John, what you have is a lived example, an emulated example of Jesus living out the command to love. Also in I'm going to say mythic traditions, outside of um, explicit legal stipulations, outside of say Aristotle's, Nicomachean ethics. Ethics used to be taught in narrative. It was really common for people to have like, the cultures of the day. When you look at Homer or the Iliad, a lot of moral teaching took place through narrative. And so for me, the Gospel of John was just as ethically imbued as Matthew. It's just it's portraying its ethics. It's communicating them in a different sort. It's not doing what Matthew does, where it's the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is like Moses being up on the mountain, and then Jesus gives his commands. It's like a commentary on the Torah, and that's intentional. That's the way Matthew phrases it. He wants to do that. Um, in the Gospel of John, it's just kind of the opposite. There aren't a whole bunch of commands. What there is this revelation of the character of God. And so the ethics of John are derived from Christ's presence and his nature itself. And so and you see that also with the dialogues that he has that I kept going back to in John chapter 10, the Good Shepherd, or in the way that he heals different people. Um, so that's kind of my answer. Why did I pick John specifically? Because it doesn't have a whole lot of explicit commands. Is that I think that the ethics are kind of maybe in a purer form because you're not being distracted by a bunch of commands. You're having a look at the raw example of who Jesus is in his nature. Also, when you look at John chapter 1, the prologue, and really the narrative throughout, but especially the prologue, it has this cosmic dimension, which kind of like harkens back to your older religions, the Canaanite religions and Roman religion. So that's my answer for you, Mike. I hope that
Okay.
that satisfies.
Yeah, it does. The Gospel of Luke has probably more about grace and forgiveness also.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Okay. All right. I have to digest everything you say. It'll take me a couple of weeks, and maybe I'll come back to some variant of that. But thank you very much for your brilliance, for sharing your brilliance.
Folks, go ahead and ask your questions, comments, please. Sorry, Gary, I had to take a call. Katie is next. Katie, go
Yes.
ahead.
Well, I can articulate the same question that I had last week, only a lot better because I was thinking about it this week.
All right.
Because we were talking about imitating Jesus. So when we say, you know, what should we do? When we say what would Jesus do, we can't just look at what Jesus did and then, create a list of how he was like a human, like he prayed and he healed, and how he's divine and miracles. So we can't do the miracles and just do what Jesus did. So how do we really know what it's like to be Christ like?
When I did the little talk on Christianity at its best, and we were kind of like talking about what was Christianity like in its earliest years, leading up to and even past Constantine. The early church saw Jesus healing miracles and then assumed that we need to go and heal people, and so they engaged in they were foremost in the creation of hospitals and in just helping the sick, in whatever situation that they were at. Um, when the early church saw the feeding, which appears in all the gospels, they just immediately said, well, Jesus fed the multitudes. Our job is to take care of the poor. And so, especially in the very early church, the gatherings were centered around an agape meal. And so we're fairly certain that it's like, there was a meal time where everybody came in and they all ate together and had this communal meal. And so there was this notion of caring for each other. And so being able to or not being able to necessarily perform the miracles of Jesus, people certainly followed that example. And it's kind of an idea of like, we see that the pain and suffering of the world are not a consequence. It's a fallen world. The whole world system is fallen apart. And part of what the church is doing is we're here, especially within the church, to kind of like to heal the earth and to heal the world. And that's why the church became such a refuge for the poor, for the widow, for the orphan, is this is the place where people could go to be sheltered, to be taken care of. And I would go one further and say that this impact, this influence was so widespread that it kind of changed the zeitgeist and just the ethical thinking of society as a whole, to where, here we are having arguments over whether or not healthcare is a right, and whether we should have SNAP benefits and things like this, economic things. That was never an issue for, early on, is what was the role of the state, is the idea that the state is there to just kind of benefit people and to kind of like lift up the downtrodden. Even think about, the new Colossus, that poem that's underneath the Statue of Liberty. Give me your poor, give me the wretched refuge of your teeming shores who are hungering to breathe free. It's like this idea of the church being a refuge, and the United States, the idea that United States was kind of like taking on that nature. And so I hope that's kind of an answer to you, is that's really kind of what was going on there.
Yes.
Marco.
Yeah, I guess are there any like modern day religions that are cosmic religions?
Shrikant, what would you have to say on that?
What is a cosmic religion, Gary?
So when we talk about like the cosmic religions, it's that the ritualism is related to its picture of the entire universe. In the ancient religions, it was a reenactment of the cosmic struggle. So like the Baal cycle, here's a good example, is that when they have their festivals, they're celebrating the defeat of Baal over Tiamat, things like that. And so the festivals were a replay or a participation in the recreation of the earth. They saw the whole world as being, kind of torn asunder every winter and being rejuvenated. And so that's why you have these special rituals on the solstice and on the equinoxes, on certain celestial paradigms. And so they just saw people as being part of this whole cosmic order, and the ritualism was actually intended to uphold the cosmic order in some sense.
In
And
that
so I
case,
was wondering, is like, does you have a better knowledge of say like Hinduism and Buddhism and stuff like that, and so you might know if there's
about Buddhism, but Taoism as well as Hinduism as well as Christianity, there is that cosmic dimension to all of them. So I would say that's like the core, because religion kind of encompasses everything. It encompasses, all of universe. It encompasses, macrocosm and microcosm. So it is like, what is going on, in the cosmos as a whole. It relates to what is going on within us as individuals. It also relates to what is going on between people. So it is this, all religions that I know are of that, at least these major religions, 3 religions that I know have that characteristic, that everything that they're saying applies at least these 3 levels, kind of inner life of a human being, you know, our dealings with each other as human beings, and, you know, our dealings with, you know, and cosmos as a whole.
I would add to that is when we think of a cosmic religion, um, we're talking about the material world, everything around us as being imbued with the sacred. You know, it's and sometimes scholars refer to this as the disenchantment or the enchanted world kind of a thing. Is that as we embrace science and materialism, we see the desk and the table in my house and all these things as just being things, and they're no longer magical. They don't have spiritual significance in and of themselves anymore. And I think that, you know, that's a kind of a sadness with a lot of modern approaches to Christianity. Is Christianity itself may be a cosmic religion, be very enchanted as it talks about the immanence of God everywhere, but we live our lives as if he wasn't present every step of the way. And so that would probably be the better way of describing what the cosmic religions are, is that there was just this focus on the immanence of the gods in every facet of life. And that's kind of the significance even now of modern Judaism, is that with the clothes that they wear, wearing the kippah, wearing the tzitzit, the way you dress, the times of the day that you pray, the way you daven, the certain blessings at different times, practicing the Shabbat, eating kosher, it brings the divine into every facet of life, every moment of the day. And so in that sense, everything you do is imbued with cosmic significance.
Marco, are we doing an okay job addressing your questions? You have a follow-up?
No, that was no, that was.
Thank you. Jeannie, you're next.
Hello, Gary. I wanted to get into something specific that I've been thinking about.
Sure.
And in specific, CJ spent so much of his life working against spam email, which I mean almost seems funny at this point. But at the time it first started, I mean, people were really quite appalled that a lot of it was very vicious and so forth. And some of it was inundating, you know, and it was a shock. I mean, we've sort of gotten used to it. And like in texting or you know, I often get these things that say something expensive has already been sent to me, you know, but I've become numb. I mean, it's still upsetting, but you know, you become numb to the fact that this is just happening on an ongoing basis. And, you know, still after all this time, you know, practically 50% of the email is, you know, and at times you can measure more or less is just spam, stuff we don't want, stuff we were really against getting at first, but now we just get used to it. And with the phone and the scam calls and stuff, like supposedly 41% of older people don't even answer the phone anymore. So we've taken that technology and it's become so, I don't know, fearful and threatening at the same time that we can't even use our technologies anymore. And I'm just wondering, is there any end to this? I mean, many people say it's inevitable. I mean, we're still spending probably more than half of what we're, you know, getting from computers, we're spending on cybersecurity. And there just seems no end to it. And you know, in terms of, you know, real sin, yes, but it is, you know, it's an affront to people, and it's very hurtful, and it's hurting our economy for sure, you know, and it's hurting our trust of each other, you know, that we can't, you know, talk on the phone anymore, things like that. So anyway, I'm wondering about, you know, what about technology? Is there any hope for it? Is there any way that we're going to get a handle on, you know, how to stop it from, and what is it that makes us do this? I mean, I don't think it's just the money. It's also maybe the challenge of, you know, breaking the barrier of what you can do, you know, to somebody, using, you know, the various technologies. I don't know. Anyway, you have some thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you. It was actually an article that I read not too long ago that really kind of broke it down, and it divided ethics in those two terms of internal versus external. You know, and external are these things that are outside of us, and internal is the cultivation of the self. And with regards to your discussion on technology, to me that just kind of like just really kind of like blows it up. Just that whole idea is that, you know, the technology, we approach technology not as like, how is it better me? How do I become a more cultivated person? But like, what can I do? What can I get? You know, does it have any utility? Does it feed my self-interest? Things like that. And so like all of your spam, none of that spam is designed to help you as a person in any way. It's just simply exploitive. And so I'm sorry about that. I When you were talking, I was just thinking is when I moved out here to take care of my dad. He had been getting a lot of spam. He doesn't have a computer, but he was getting lots of prank calls. And these calls were telling him to go to the bank and to withdraw funds and to mail it to people in Washington, D.C. and different parts of the world. And he had dementia. And so he was extremely vulnerable to that kind of stuff. And fortunately, his bank people had known him for like 30 years and they were very sensitive to all that stuff. And so they would redirect him, and they saved him a lot of money and ended up reaching out to me to kind of take care of him. And so kind of as a callback to your question is, you know, the idea of ethics is about building community. It's about being close to other people, and it's about bettering ourselves. And what was really significant is the people at the bank were genuinely concerned for my dad's well-being. And so they intervened on his behalf, you know, and reached out and got a hold of me. And I'm always going to be, I'm always just so thankful to them for that. And so I've just had this wonderful, blessed relationship with the bank people ever since then. I wish I had a better answer for you. But yeah, it's just like, when you're describing what you're describing, it's like, yes, that's pure egoism. That's the problem with the world, is that we're going to go ahead and do what we want for our own self-interest, and then maybe after the fact, you know, come up with some excuse of why it was the moral thing to do. We'll convince ourselves that we were right. What do you have to say, Shrikant?
I don't have anything much to say. I mean, I think the technology simply is a means, and it just allows people to do whatever it is that they want to do. And so it is like it's just a tool, you know, just increases the scope of things, you know, higher technology. I don't think people are different. It's just that they are kind of uh, you know, they're kind of empowered to do more things. So I don't think the problem lies in technology itself. It lies in something very deeper in how human beings view life. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, this is where my question is gonna be kind of confusing, but it's kind of similar to my question I had before. So Jesus says, love one another. He doesn't say, you know, don't do anything that breaks down trust between each other. So how do we go from the love command, love and to other than just feeling like that's wrong to do that because it doesn't feel, you know what I'm trying to say? How do I go from, because I'm so literal. I'm almost like a Pharisee going like, well, the Bible doesn't say the word trust. So, you know, how do I know, you know, I'm just going from love to how do we make the connection?
Um, well, so I'll tell you, like, in my paper, one of the things I focused on was this idea of moral progress. Um, we don't just suddenly wake up in the morning and we're ready for theosis and this mystical union with God. I wish that we could do that. Um, but that's, that's not all of us. And so the analogy of the child is really good. Is, early on, the child says, like, I want to do this, and you just kind of say no, and they ask why, and you say, because I said so. So you use some sort of, divine command, rationale, because they can't really, go beyond that. They don't have the reason beyond that. Or, a child wants them something, or you want them to do something, and so you use rewards to incentivize it. So that's, you're appealing to egoism. And then as they progress, they get a little bit, older, you explained, some things are right all the time, some things are wrong. So now they have that aspect of it. And then you start teaching them about consequences and benefits of moral action. So now they do that. And so I guess what I was getting at in some of these things is that the goal is for us to cultivate virtue. And it takes time to get there. And really the goal in the Bible is beyond virtue. It's communication with God himself, is to enjoy God's presence. And that example of it is through Jesus, where Jesus is like, I don't do anything except what my Father commands me to do, and so, and if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus is in such, beautiful and close relationship with the Father that, that their wills are inseparable. Jesus only does what the Father's will is. It takes time to get there. Shrikant might have a better idea of, like, how do you do this? But leading up to it is I'll just say this one is for whatever reason, every time that love command is listed, when we look in the Synoptic Gospels, when we look at it in the Pauline epistles, when we look at it in the in James, it always says the same thing, is that all the law and the prophets are summed up in this one command, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so that was already in the zeitgeist of rabbinic Judaism before Jesus even. And so there is this idea that is the overarching thing. But as Rabbi Hillel said, is the rest is details, you still have to study it. And so going back and I would say reading, reading the Bible, but specifically focusing on the character of Jesus and really kind of inquiring, what does it mean to love one another? But now Shrikant, I know he has a lot to say here because this is his area.
So Katie, I want to answer both of your questions. Your first question was, what does it mean to imitate Jesus, right? And the second one was, where is trust in the literal form? Where is trust? Can you rephrase both your questions?
Your first question is exactly that, is what does it mean to be Christ-like? Because we can't, so if you're saying what would Jesus do, and I was saying looking at what Jesus did do, how do we go from that to how to be Christ-like? And my other question is, the love command is very open in my mind. It doesn't say don't facilitate things that cause people to distrust each other, which for me seems more aligned with which seems opposite from love, or so but it doesn't explicitly tell us don't do that. So how do we really know? That's where I can be a little bit like the people saying, well, then you said if it says don't work on Saturday, don't work on Saturday. I can be like that if they're not spelling it out.
Right. I mean, I'll just tell you my approach to it. I think when we talk about imitating Jesus, it is about being like a person. It's not really about doing what he does. Doing what he does is a consequence. Like if you focus on, like, what would Jesus do, then you're focused on actions, right? It's like imitating at this level is about being like a person. So it's kind of internalizing what he is. So it is like, and then kind of what he would do in that, and this kind of connecting it with the love command and its implementation, what he's saying is, as I have loved you, love one another. He's not saying love one another. He's saying, as I have loved you. So in order to understand that, you kind of have to put yourself in his shoes. So it is all about being able to put yourself in Christ's shoes. I mean, so it is not about particular actions. So it's like when you kind of focus on particular actions, it becomes like a ritual. It's like, okay, this is what I need to do. Please tell me what to do, right? And so that is kind of going back to laws. What New Testament is about is love, and it's not your love or how we understand as love, but as as his love for us, which is agape, which is this pouring yourself out into another person. That's what he does, and that's what he's asking us to do. Now you're saying, how is that connected with don't distrust, another word? So it's like, again, if you put yourself in Christ's shoes, it's like he's pouring ourselves. What he did was that he poured himself out even for people who murdered him. He's doing that for people. So the standard that he's setting is much higher than what we can even imagine. So I don't know whether this is it's a completely different. My way of thinking is it's kind of person based instead of action based. I don't know whether that makes any sense.
I think you're right. That you're saying, I think I was saying that last time, it could be the action, but the point is the character behind the action more than because I tend to fixate on the action.
Right.
Because I like to feel very safe in knowing what I'm doing. I think, yeah.
Right. And what Christ is saying is that don't look for safety. I mean, don't, because safety means that you're trying to say, okay, I don't want to transgress the law. That's the way of thinking. I have to take a call. Gary,
Got it.
Gary, may I say something?
Yes.
To me, you can love someone without fully trusting them, but to me, the true love requires the trust in that person. But that's just me.
Well, I'm going to have two responses, both, but also going back to Katie's. When I first was working on, trying to come up with a thesis topic, I was originally going to do the book of Galatians. And so I'm just going to read a section from Galatians, and you'll probably see why I was originally going to choose this. Chapter 5, from verse 13 all the way to the end. It says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ, Jesus, have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let's not become conceited, provoking and envying envying each other. And so that whole section on the deeds of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit is kind of like an exposition of that love command. That's how it begins. Like, what is it? All the law is summed up in this command to love one another. And then he talks about against such things there is no law. And so there's a sense that we're able to transcend the law by living these virtues. And so he kind of concludes with this like little virtue list. And that's where it got to me. And that's why I was inspired to do this thesis and go back to school, because it's just like, oh, there's a way to live your life without being told how to do all these little things. It's like, if you understand the virtues of God, this is what you live in that attitude, of joy, peace, gentleness, kindness, long suffering. Another aspect that's repeats itself throughout the epistles, and in the Gospels, it also talks about this, is that we all have unique talents. Shrikant is able to do a bunch of things that I certainly can't do. He's really good at moderating these meetups. I am not nearly as good as Shrikant is at all of this stuff, and he's also much more social than I am. And so the idea is that we employ our unique talents that we have, our unique gifts of the Spirit, and then we bear fruit of the Spirit. And that's how each of us exemplifies that love command uniquely, our unique gifts bearing the fruit of the Spirit. Or at least that's how I understand it.
Nalini, I'm so sorry I missed your question or comment. Could you please repeat that?
No, I just said one sentence, that you may not trust someone when you love, but to me, it means that, I don't know how I said it earlier, but to me, it is trusting that person, and love encompasses that trust and faith in that person. And to me, that is love. But that's just me.
Yeah, no, that's very good. It's a very good point. Actually, if you look at these roots of these words, they tell a whole different story. I think the words that we use, in the translation of the New Testament are, English doesn't do justice to them. So for example, faith, right, is pistevo. Pistevo means to hold on to something. It is saying, you have to grab it with all your mind, hold on to it with all your mind, all your heart, all your strength, all your body, right? So all three things you're grabbing and holding on, and that serves as a foundation for things. So actually the word pistevo, I think the closer translation is trust. So it's not like believe is too weak a word in English, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The word trust, and say, okay, I trust this person. That means I use that as a base. Also, the word believe in the Old English has the same root as love. So this love, faith,
Believe.
hope, all of them are kind of pointing similarly in similar direction. There is slight differences. Hope is about the future. Faith is about the confidence and trust. And love is this, thing within you. So it's very much of a Trinitarian, way of thinking. And it is, us modern folks like to kind of be analytical. Okay. Analytical means to cut. Okay. So we cut ourselves into parts. and hope that we'll understand ourselves better if we do an autopsy on ourselves. And then we realize that, oh, okay, we've just cut ourselves, a living being we have cut up, so we don't live anymore. Whereas the entire words which are there in the original Greek kind of mesh with each other as a unit. They have distinct kind of characters, but they all kind of mesh together and work together. But so thank you, great. Katie, I don't know if sorry I got interrupted when I was answering your question, and you were telling me what you thought. So I just want to make sure that I communicated something. What did you think?
Oh, I loved it. I think that's exactly what we were saying earlier. Is it's easy to fixate on the laws and just to, to think I'm being a good person if I'm complying with the laws. Or if
Right.
we're focusing on actions and then to forget the reason behind the action. I think it's kind of what's good is to have kind of both, is to have kind of awareness of, understanding what he did do, but also kind of looking for the reason behind it, more looking at his character to be guiding.
Yes, Katie, that is beautiful, because it is fundamentally character. So what you're taking, for example, when we say, when the Bible says believe in his name, right? Name is onoma, which actually means character. So you're believing in his character, or it also means nature. So you're believing in the nature, you have trust in the nature, trust in the character. And another way of thinking about it is that the New Testament flows inside out. Okay, the Old Testament hopes to do stuff outside and somehow manage the inside as a result of that. Okay, whereas the New Testament flows inside out. So it is the character of a person that is being flown, that is flowing out through his words and deeds, thoughts, words, and deeds, whatever is there in his soul is flowing out. So it is in that direction. So I think character, the word character, captures it very well. Another angle of it is the quote that Gary was saying, fruits of the Spirit. Gary, can you name each of them again, the fruits of the Spirit, just one by one? Okay, because then you can see you're on mute.
All right, got it. So love.
Okay, so now what you do is that fruits of the Spirit is actually the result. See, God is Spirit. Okay, so don't think of it as just the Holy Spirit. Okay, as you think of him as Christ. That's the easiest way. So if you want to see what does it mean to imitate Christ, this is the list. So it's like you must be full of love. What's the next one?
Joy.
Joy. So you have to be full of joy. Okay, because you are, in Christ, right? What's the next one?
Peace.
Peace. See, he's peace itself, right? It's not that he gives peace. He gives peace because he is peace. So he is joy itself. He is love itself. And we are, when we participate in it, we become loving. We become peaceful to the extent to which we have peace, which is Christ. We are loving to the extent to which we have love, who is Christ. So it's, he's truth. So to the extent to which we are true depends on how much. So that is the way of kind of applying this. What was the next one?
Patience.
Patience. When you can see his patience, right? You see his patience with us and with people who are actually crucifying him, right? And he's still praying for them. He's still, he's doing it for their salvation, even when they're doing that. So look at the level of patience of that.
I think of patience when the disciples are always like baffled. Through all four of the Gospels, they're always baffled. They don't know what's going on. He's very patient with them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
What are the other ones?
Kindness.
Kindness. Again, it's like look at his kindness, right? I mean, look at his humility, and all of those are like, see, these are all, if you look at it, these are all virtues, right? And these are aspects of the character. They're not telling you what do you particularly do, what do I do in this situation, But when you internalize these things and then you act from it, so it's absolutely true that you can't do anything without action. Action comes, but the question is, what comes first? Character comes first. That's how, that's what New Testament is saying, that you have the character which has these virtues in you, and then your actions will just proceed from that. So that is the order of causality within you. You build a character and then you act out the character. What are we missing?
Goodness.
Goodness. Yes. Again, he's not good. He's goodness itself. People are good to the extent to which we have him. That character, if you have that character in you, you have goodness in you. It's the same idea. I'm sorry, I don't remember this by heart.
No, that's okay. It's and I don't have it memorized by heart either. I fortunately have brought it up.
Okay.
The last three are faithfulness.
Okay, faithfulness. See, we talk about faith, right? That it takes faith to go to him, right? And which is trust.
Yes.
And then what he gives you is his faith. Okay. Look at the faith he has in the Father. Okay. And look at the faith he has in us. Okay. Of all people. It's both ways. It is that kind of that trust that he has, that, okay, even though these people have screwed up so badly, he is basically patiently waiting at the door. And he's faithful. He's faithful when we are not faithful. So look at the faith over there. What are the last two? Or give me one by one.
Gentleness.
Yes. He's gentleness itself, he's full of power, and you see him, especially when, during the cross, you can see his entire, and what is that gentleness, right? Gentleness is basically the value that he places on us. And what's the last one?
Self-control.
Right. It's like he's doing the right thing. It's righteousness, but it is righteousness of, of being very deliberate. The way he puts it, your will, not mine. So you're always following his will. You're doing not what passions move you this way or that way, but you're acting in his person. So I hope this is useful. Thank you, Katie. Yes, so we'll go to Nalini and then Jeannie. Nalini.
That was beautiful what you read just now, Gary, and the way you explained. To me, it's still everything that is mentioned, each and everything is love.
Yes.
When you love someone, you want to trust that person. You have to have faith in that person. You want to be gentle to that person. You want to be patient with that person. All these different things. To me, that is what love is, true love is, that you trust the person. Because love is all encompassing. It's not one single thing. And if we talk about love just by itself, that's not really love. Because love is what all this is about. I don't know, but that's how I feel.
No, actually, that's what the, like John, that is his central thesis. What he's saying, he simply says God is love.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what God is.
Yeah.
And if you have that, and love there, again, the word love is very poor in capturing what's being said, because there are so many things that we attribute that we denote by the word love.
Mhm.
Greeks had multiple words for it, and the love that is used here in the New Testament, in this context, is agape. Agape is basically pouring yourself out
Yeah.
into the other.
Yeah.
And so what the like the theologians, they say, look, the way in which the Trinity is, it's three persons, and it is three because love cannot be just one person.
Mhm.
So it is the Father loving the Son and giving everything in the hands of the Son giving everything into the hands of the Spirit, loving the Spirit with everything he has, Spirit loving the Father, and the other way too, Son loving the Father, Father loving. And so it's kind of this pouring out of one into the other is what God is. So God is love. And it is that flow between the three persons is what God is. That is the nature of God. And some of these early church fathers, they say, okay, creation is just overflowing of that love, which is God, because it's just so much that it just flows out into the world. So God so loved the world. So it's like it's the creation, through love. And that's what we are called. And human beings are special because we are, we have both kind of the spirit in us and matter in us. So we have the ability to love like that. And that is the grace that we have been given. Unfortunately, most of us don't use it much, but that's what God is. It's the same thing as saying that we don't, another way of putting it is that these patristic fathers have a psychology of three parts. There is the body, there is the soul, and there is the spirit. So you are a being of soul, which is the core of you, and the body. And you have the ability to take spirit, which is God, in your soul. So there is the spirit, which is God, which is love, which can be in your soul if you so choose. But it doesn't have to be. You have the freedom to fill your soul with the body, to kind of get focused on food or wealth or power or prestige. And then that is what you will be. You will be like that. And you will not have the spirit in you. So it is not like spirit versus body. It is whether primarily your soul has spirit or it does not. So there is just, like people use the term antichrist, but anti in Greek simply means other than. So it's like if you have anti-spirit, if you're anti-spirit, that means you simply have something other than spirit in your soul. And so I agree. It's that's kind of the core of the New Testament, that it is kind of going back to that love, going back to the spirit. It is like in John 3, Christ says, you must be born from above, or born of the spirit, born of water and spirit. Water is to wash away that in your soul, which is focused on the body. So to clean yourself up so that you can be born from above with spirit. And that's the same of love. And love is exactly opposite of fear. Most people think of it as hatred, but it's mostly fear. It's like when you are attached to things, you're already worrying about, okay, what if somebody takes it away? So your entire relationship to other people changes when you're pointed down. So you can think of it as being pointed up or pointed down. Are you looking up or are you looking down? And what Christ is saying is look up. That's what he's saying. That's all he's saying. Look up. Most of us are looking down, and then we get, he's another way of thinking about it is that he's light, right? And in order to be in him, you have to look up at the light. Instead of that, most of the times we look down and we see shadows. We see no light, we see shadows. Of course, even the shadows are created by light, but still we look at shadows and we get all enamored by shadows. And then we have this entire shadow play of saying, oh, that shadow looks better than me, so I'm envious. That shadow is coming towards me, so I'm fearful. All kinds of things that happen on that shadow plane. But that's because the light is missing. But the light is always shining. So if you choose, you can always look up. So, Nalini, thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for explaining all this. And also explaining the anti-meaning, which I didn't know. That was very, very useful. One other thing you mentioned about using the water to clean, and it just, and I may be wrong, but you both can clarify that, that when Jesus, washes the feet, and when he goes to, I think it's Peter, who refuses, he says, no, you can't touch my feet, or you can't wash my feet. And he says, no, I have to wash your feet. And he says, you can wash my hands and my, I think, head or something like that. And he says, no, I have to, I don't know, Gary or Shrikant, you can explain it better than that. Can you just clarify that a little bit for me?
Gary, have you ever heard of this passage?
Yes, I have once. Peter is put off. He's like, oh Lord, you're gonna wash my feet? Like, why would you do that? He's appalled. And he should, because it's the job of a servant to wash feet.
Yes, yeah.
And this is his Lord. And he says, if I don't wash your feet, then you have no part with me. And so he does a 180. He goes, oh, then don't just stop with my feet. Wash my hands and my head as well. And so then Jesus says, hey, your whole body is already clean. You only need your feet washed.
Right.
And so then he washes his feet.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's the scene there. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll just make a quick comment and then we'll go to Jeannie. Jeannie, thank you for being so patient. So this is again love, right? And what we're saying, like what Peter's reaction is a natural human reaction. It's like, who am I? And you're so high and I'm so low. How can you wash my feet? That's not proper, right? But that's exactly the point of the whole New Testament. That highest shall be the lowest. He's the King of Kings who became servant of servant. And that is love. That is love in action. And that's what he's asking us to do. Because otherwise, when we use the word love, we are plugging in our own thought into what it is. That's not what he's saying. He's simply saying, he's actually showing you this action. As I have washed you, if I, as master, have washed your feet, then you shall wash each other's feet. So then you shall wash the other person's feet. So if I wash their feet, what problem do you have in washing their feet? Okay, that's what he's saying. So he's uplifting everybody in your eyes because he has uplifted everybody himself. He's saying, hold that. And that is what it is. Another way of thinking about it is like, his love is pouring down on you and you are too little to hold it. your heart doesn't have space. So you have to let it out, which is the cross, which is the horizontal of the cross. You have to give it to others. That's the only way you can, because if you try to hoard it, if you hold on to the water, there is no more place for the water to come in. Okay? You're kind of blocking it off because you're now proud of whatever little you think you have, which is not yours anyway. So he's capturing all of that in this one simple action. Jeannie, thank you for your patience. Please go ahead.
So, one time, a long time ago, I had a young coworker, and she told me that I basically owed it to the world to be a happy, fulfilled person. And I don't know if that's a selfish thing, but it was a sort of a comfort to me because I was wondering, if I was on the right path and so forth. But I was actually thinking of bringing up the idea of service before you guys brought it up. But the idea, what I like about the idea of serving, this greater purpose of, God or the universe or, whatever's out there, is that it's something that we can always seek, and it's not a fixed kind of morality. So in other words, if you're serving somebody, one time they need this, at another time they need that, or you get more information and then you understand that this is what you need to do. So it gives you that flexibility of continually, adjusting what you're doing to how you perceive, the needs of the whole, the general, universe. I like the universe, but it's God. I mean, if God has a purpose, you want to be a servant to that purpose. And it brings in all those virtues that you mentioned too, which was good. So that was about what I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie.
All right. Anybody else has anything they would like to bring up? Hi, Nalini. You are on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I thought I better show my face.
Nice to see you.
Good to
It's
see
nice
you.
to see you.
Yeah. Yeah. So aren't these discussions amazing?
This was really, really wonderful. Yeah. I'm sorry I missed one or two, but this was amazing. Yeah.
No, I'm going to put all of them up on
Okay.
and I will send you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, but this was really good. I loved it.
Wonderful.
And I just love that, the meaning of love, or what it is. It is just beautiful.
Yes. Glory to God. Yeah. All right. So thank you very much, everybody. What are we doing next time, Gary?
Next time is the part 2 of this, where we look at the cosmic nature of Christianity, compared with some of the other religions that are contemporary in the time of Jesus, like Philo and the Stoics and Plato and stuff like that. But the idea is to zoom in on what exactly does John mean by the Spirit,
Yes.
and to see if does the Stoic understanding of the Spirit shed some light on what John's use of the Logos and the Spirit, those kinds of things. So just kind of zoom in on it. And I think I sent you the title and the description in the email I sent you.
I'm going to go ahead and announce it right away.
All right.
All right, Gary, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Marco, go ahead.
No, you said before that love is the opposite of fear. And so you're saying something about the shadow, you know, like fearing the shadow, which is, you know, the shadow is like comes from the light, but so are you supposed to like love the shadow or like just
No, no, no. Let me do this. This is my favorite quote on fear. Okay, it's from a movie, not from a movie, but from a book. So I'm not saying that. I mean, that was just a passing comment, because what happens is that it's the same idea of the Antichrist. The Antichrist is not actually against Christ. There is nothing which is against God. Okay, nothing can actually stand against God. It's simply that issue comes in only in our soul. It's a question of whether when we who are supposed to be pointed towards God are pointed towards something else. And not just, it's like the question is, what is your arche? You know, it's like arche is a beginning. You know, what is your starting point? What's your foundation, right? And when God is your foundation, Spirit is your foundation, everything is different. And then when you go to everybody or everything through God, everything looks very different. If you look at things just on a material basis, they look very different. Think about people, right? Like the moment you start thinking about them through God, right? When you through God means that you see, like in Indian tradition, right? When you do namaste, you're saying God in you greets God in me greets God in you. That's what you're saying. And now when you connect to one another like that, suddenly the differences kind of dissolve. They don't matter anymore, because now you have a foundation which is much more deeper. So I don't think that was just a passing comment, Marco. But can you ask the question again?
Yeah, I guess you know, you said the fear is the opposite of love. Yeah, are you supposed to love I mean, love something that you fear, I guess? You know, to like dissipate the fear, or um, like you just love instead of show
Okay.
love instead of fear.
Okay, I don't know how to answer that. So let me answer it in a roundabout way, okay? By talking a little bit about fear. This is my favorite quote on fear, which is from a science fiction book called Dune, okay? It says, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over and through me. When it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye upon its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. What it is saying is that actually it is, I mean, you know, what I think is that really the killer is the fear of fear. It's not even fear. It's like you are afraid that you will have problems. It's this anxiety, okay, of lack of trust in kind of existence itself, in God itself, in yourself itself, which just undercuts you. Love is the opposite of that. Love is like this overflowing embrace of things, whereas fear is drawing away from things. So it is like, you know, love, as we were saying, is kind of pouring out, whereas fear is trying to say, okay, you know what? Also, love means it's based on abundance. that there is more and more grace. You don't have to hoard grace, okay? There is just so much grace. There is so much love. You can't say, oh, how can I love? I might run out of love. No, you won't, okay? Whereas fear is based on scarcity. You're saying, no, there is just, it's like you get, and then fear is just like a placeholder for all negative emotion for me. Other things like envy, it's like if you fear, then you are kind of envious of other people. If you fear, you kind of hate other people. So that's how it's like this entire complex of negative emotions, which kind of theme in the water, which is not flowing. Okay, it's like a pond. You're saying, oh, there isn't enough water, so let me hoard this. And then all kinds of bad things keep building in that pond, okay, because you have stopped the living water, from flowing in and out of you. So it is, and it's quite damaging, it's really damaging. And when I kind of look back at my life, and I see the cost of just fear, and when you look back upon a time, you realize really there was no reason to fear. There's no cause whatsoever to fear. And it was just a complete waste of what, so I don't know if this helps, but that's all I can think.
I have only one tiny little thing to add to that, and it was a book I was reading. The Dalai Lama was recounting a story of a Buddhist monk that was in a Chinese prison where he was tortured, and he didn't know if he was going to be released ever, or if he was just going to die in prison. And as it came about, he was released. And then he was interviewed afterwards. This monk was interviewed, and they said, "Oh, being in that prison, you must have been afraid that whole time that you were going to die." And he says, "No, I was never afraid that I was going to die. I was afraid that I would lose my compassion for the people who were torturing me." And so that's kind of like what love does, is it conquers fear. It conquers all of that. And it's, for me, what's so beautiful is the only thing he was afraid of is losing his capacity to love, being so overcome by the world that he couldn't love anymore.
Gary, have I told you my Dalai Lama story?
No.
Okay. So I was at this hotel in Amritsar. This is a, really kind of top hotel in Amritsar. I was doing an event there, and I was in the lobby, I think getting food or something like that. And suddenly there was this entire police presence, like tons of police vehicles of all shapes and sizes showed up right outside. And then it's like a whole bunch of police everywhere in the lobby. And I was saying, okay, what's going on? And then I see Dalai Lama walking, okay, and coming. It's like surrounded by entire security, okay? They're very concerned about his safety. So they were all around him. And then he sees a bunch of kids. So he just stops everything. It's like they were trying to kind of whisk him off to his room in a secure place. But here in the middle of the lobby, he goes to the children and he's just full of smiles. He's hugging them, he's kissing them, he's talking to them for like good 15-20 minutes. And everybody is kind of very concerned and looking around. And they are full of fear. But he's just simply with children, and children are tremendously happy. There are all people who were kind of expecting him to be there, so they were waiting to talk to him, but he doesn't go to any of them. He just goes. These children, they don't know who he is, but they react to him. They react to him because he's like a child, and then he spends whatever time. He was getting pretty old at that point, so he was had difficulty walking and stuff like that. So finally, after 15, 20 minutes, he just says goodbye to all of them and goes off. But but you can see the kind of the humanity and the love. And it's the same with the question that Katie was asking. You know, you look at a person like that and you see God in them. You know, you can see it through who they are. And everybody reacts to that. You know, of course, it is shown in his actions, but it is shown even without him saying a word, you know, just by his being, you know, it's like that. And so this is the point. So I'm glad I got to tell my story. All right, folks. So thank you so much. We'll see you next
Thank
Thursday.
you.
Bye.
Thank you,
so
Shrikant.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you, Gary, for doing this. Bye.
Thank you all.